Good evening and welcome to another edition of Mental Health Mondays, brought to you by Grace South Cincinnati and Saving Grace Community Church. Joining me on this Monday, and it is Monday because if you see us two together, it is Monday.
That's right.
Joining me once again is Dr. Quentin Maltz, founder and CEO and Chief Medical Director of Modern Psychology. Good evening, my friend.
Good evening. Good evening. Good to be here.
Thanksgiving is coming up the fourth week of this month, fourth Thursday of this month. And as we approach that day and as we get into the holidays, sometimes it can be a time where we're supposed to be thankful. Sometimes we may catch a case of the holiday blues. Someone once said that when it comes to life, the critical thing is whether you take things for granted or take them with gratitude.
Mm.
And truly, I believe that gratitude and being thankful is a choice. It's an option, whether we see the glass half empty or whether we see it half full. But oftentimes sometimes we talk about being grateful, and really it turns into being something tongue in cheek, where we saying, "Oh, you got to be grateful," right? And then even in worship, raise your hand and tell the Lord you're grateful, and how important it is. We tell our kids, as parents, we tell our kids, you need to be grateful that you have a place, to stay. You got roof over your head, you got food, and we go on and on and on and on and on and on and on. But sometimes we miss that the understanding of how being ungrateful and not grateful will affect our psyche. Share with us, Dr. Moss, as we talk about gratitude. Let's just start off with why should we be grateful, and does it just have spiritual ramifications? Does it have emotional ramifications, consequences if we're not?
I think all of the above. We can talk all night about the spiritual component to this, but there's also a neuropsychological component to gratitude. And you mentioned something at the start, stating that gratitude was a choice, right? And, for years, I've thought that gratitude was mostly about a feeling, an emotion that we have. And most people think that, gratitude is an emotion, is a feeling, and yet we can feel good while we're having gratitude. But actually, gratitude is a thinking thing. So, they've done studies and they've tried to figure out, where is gratitude in the brain? If we were to have people to have an exercise of gratitude, where would it be? So one of the theories was that it's in the limbic area of the brain, is where we have a great deal of our emotion and moods. And the studies have shown that it's not located there. It's actually in our prefrontal cortex. That's where we make decisions. We are very volitional and intentional about what we do. So in deciding to be, grateful, to have this exercise of gratitude, is a thinking thing. It's an intentional thing. It's something that we have to make the choice to actually go through the exercise. And it's not necessarily something that has to follow a particular emotion or a mood.
Well, I would think that, it's something that, again, we often allude to. But given that, what does life look like for a person? Of course, we know what it looks like for someone spiritually who goes through life and takes for granted what they have. But from an emotional standpoint, how can that affect someone's will to live or desire to achieve if they're not grateful for the things they have?
One of the things that we know is that when we have the tendency to focus on the negative, focus on what's not going right, these thoughts that we have, they carry power and energy. And when we have that thought pattern of being negative, always looking for the bad, or particularly if we watch a lot of news or we're on Facebook a lot, we see it, everything that we can criticize, our brain tends to then recruit other nerve cells to strengthen that thought pattern. So over a period of time, this thought pattern becomes a way of seeing life. And when it does that, then everything that we see is tainted or blemished with that negativity. So over time, it affects our mood negatively. People are more prone to anxiety, more prone to depression, more prone to be in an inflamed state in their bodies. We focus on the negative. Now, when we flip that around and we try to practice gratitude, we are intentionally trying to flip the script on that. So one way that we do that is to have a gratitude writing exercise where we will write down 3 things each day that we're grateful for. And even if you're doing that each day and you're writing down the same 3 things that you're grateful for, that's okay. But writing down 3 things that you're grateful for. And what happens is then the brain then starts to recruit again these nerve cells to actually channel into positive energy.
Wow.
And we have that positive thought pattern. It then starts to multiply and play itself forward.
Wow.
When we're negative, we're always looking for the negative. We're looking for the negative in someone's response, we're looking for the negative in what their face look like or how they turn around and talk to you. We're looking for the negative. But when we practice the gratitude exercise, we then start to look even unconsciously for things that are positive.
Wow.
We start to highlight the positive experiences. And then that energy starts to, again, build on itself. And there have been experiments to show, what happens when we practice simply writing down 3 things that we're grateful for. And we do it over time.
I mean, because some people carry, the reputation of being negative Neds and Debbie Downers. And really, the Flintstone had a character whose name was Sleprock. And if you recall, Sleprock walked around Bedrock saying, "Wowsy, wowsy, woo woo, wowsy, wowsy, woo woo." And there are a lot of people who act just like Sleprock. They absolutely can find nothing good out of the greatest moment. They can find nothing joyful in the most celebratory moment because they have trained, and they are continuously on a recruiting mission for negative emotions rather than positive ones.
That's very true. There's research that's coming to light to say that if I've trained my brain to focus on the negative, and of course I'm going to continue to see the negative, and I've allowed my brain to function in a way that it needs the negative to feel normal. So over time, we become addicted to negative.
Wow.
But by practicing gratitude or trying to do this gratitude exercise, we can try to slowly reverse that thinking pattern, right? Try to recruit these nerve cells down different pathways so that we can think in a different way. And when we do that, Pastor, this isn't something that changes over 3 or 4 days. It doesn't change over 3 or 4 weeks. But experiments show that after we've done this for a number of weeks, typically after 3 or more months, it becomes more automatic, becomes easier, and we start to see the mood benefits of that. There was actually a study, if I could dive into this a little bit, there was a study looking at college students, and they were very depressed college students. The college students were getting psychiatric treatment, right? So they were seeing, all of the students were seeing a therapist at regular intervals, having counseling, right? So they took these folks and they divided into 3 groups. One group, we want you to continue to do your counseling and see your therapist. Then the other group, we want you to write down your emotions and feelings. Write down emotions and feelings. And then the third group, we want you to just write down things that you're grateful for. Don't send it to anyone in particular, but just write down those things that we're grateful for. What they found is that after several weeks, those who had been writing down their emotions, they had improvement because they were in therapy, but their improvement did not match at all the tremendous improvement that people had when they were writing down the gratitude that they had.
Wow.
It was a slow build to see that. What happened later is that we want you guys to stop the exercises. Don't write down the negative feelings. Don't write down the gratitude. Just continue counseling. Those people who had been writing down the gratitude in the experiment months after they had stopped, continued to see the benefit of the
Wow.
gratitude that they had done while they were in the experiment.
Wow. 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 What's the expression that if you do something for 30 straight days, it becomes a habit?
Yes, if we invest time into this, we can change this negative thinking that some of us are plagued with.
How when you think about, these college students and you think about people that we interact with and look at our own outlook on life, um, how is our upbringing, our foundation, how does that influence and affect us as we continue on and we maturate in life in terms of how we view life? I mean, there's some people who are adults and people that are older than us by 20 some 25 years. And when you talk to them and you talk about their life in general, you can see that they created an environment for negativity. And what would you say to somebody who is a product? We're all products of our environment, and their parents were influencers and have influenced them. Never look on the bright side.
Mhm. I will say that they have work to do.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking a few minutes ago about making decisions in regards to what we can do to positively affect our mood.
Mm-hmm.
So if I know that I come from an environment where there's been a great deal of negativity, whether the folks who are around us, their typical conversations were dissecting other people, dissecting situations to bring out the negative. If that was as around, or if I come from an environment where there's a great deal of trauma, right,
Mm-hmm.
which can
Mm-hmm.
also influence our outlook, then I've got to get into the mental gym.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm starting to do some things that can change the way that my brain thinks. And part of that is gratitude. Part of that is trying to correct our distorted thought patterns, which there's a whole nother show to
Mm-hmm.
talk about that. But there are some things that I have to actively do to change the way that I think and I feel, rather than passively sitting and waiting for my mood to just change.
And I think you're right. But the challenge is for us to take stock and look at ourselves. Shakespeare said, to thy own self be true," and to look at ourselves to see. Um, because what happens in life is if we have a negative experience in something, and we have, let's just say we go on a bad date. If you're a single person, you go on a bad date, bad date, bad date, bad date, and then sooner than you say, you know what, I'm through. I'm not dating anymore. People can try to holler at me. They can try to get to know me. They can try to get. I'm through. And so my outlook is like, I'm not dealing with anyone. Uh, and so I'm going to become a recluse. I'm going to get into my shell. And I think that really people, because they've had trauma on a greater or lesser scale,
Right.
and it affects the ability to interact socially and to develop, and it affects the personal relationships. And so as we begin to practice, I think there needs to be some affirmation uh, about oneself as well.
Mm. What I would like to add to that is that this work and what you described is something that people don't have to do alone,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I can't necessarily, sew up a stitch on my leg. If I got a laceration or if I got a broken arm, I'm not going to reset it by myself, right? I'm going to go to someone who can help me or do that, help me through that process. And I think that when we talk about mental health and we're changing our thought patterns, it is a very heavy lift to be able to do this by ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But if we can get in a community of other people who have walked that path or who are trying to walk that path, or we can get ourselves in front of a professional who can help us to take that journey, is something that can be accomplished. Yes, I would agree that this is not something in changing our thought patterns and how we look at ourselves and how we look at our future, and even this thing of gratitude. This isn't something that we can just easily do often by ourselves.
When you think about people that are ungrateful, certainly we can see spiritually where they went left to center. But oftentimes, the question I have is a lack of gratitude symptomatic of something else going on, such as depression or anxiety, that it affects one's ability to be grateful?
It does. When we are depressed, we've kind of short circuited our thinking. We're not able to think oftentimes with this prefrontal cortex that I talked about and
Mhm.
making decisions. And we tend to make decisions, unfortunately, from the limbic area where we have our seat of our emotions.
Mhm.
So it's kind of hard to kind of pull through that. Same thing with an anxiety. But again, having someone who we can kind of open up ourselves to show where we have our challenges and for us to kind of guide us through that would be helpful. And getting appropriate treatment for depression and anxiety. It's interesting that when we have very depressed mothers,
Mhm.
who are impoverished, and then we look at their offspring and how well they do, some of that is genetic, right? Some of that is lack of nurturing because the mother was very depressed, right? But also some of that is the negative worldview that sometimes depression creates, and that
Mhm.
the offspring then absorb that same negative worldview.
Wow. Wow. And so I guess, one of the things we should do, because there's an expression says that we are what we eat, but we are what we think.
Yes, we are.
And I think that as we look at our computers, as we look at our phones, and we have to delete things to make room for other things, I think that as we look at our lives, the things that we've gone through, though we can't forget some things, we've got to delete some parts of them to give us hope and that we're able to be grateful for what we have.
Mhm.
And I think there's a difference between being content and there's a difference between being complacent. And I think that when we become complacent, I would think that we invite the opportunity to be ungrateful for just the lack of movement in our lives. I believe that to be content is to say, I have what I have, and that's cool. But not to be complacent is to say, I have what I have, and that's cool. But I wouldn't have more, and I'm going to pursue that. And I think that we run a risk. Would you agree that sometimes our level of gratitude or lack thereof depends upon how intentional purpose we are in trying to chart our course and fulfill our destiny?
I we are bombarded probably more now than any time in human existence with our ability to compare ourselves to others and where we should be with milestones. And the music that we listen to, the ads that we see on TV, everything that we see on Facebook, just about is really about trying to make a comparison of ourselves to other people. And when we tend to focus on that, which is a whole rabbit, a whole gerbil wheel all by itself, but when we focus on that, we're not mindful and we miss the things that we have that are going great. You know, and we create these lofty expectations, often built on materialism, that most of us would never achieve.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at posts on Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
I look at the picture perfect lives that I put up there. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, who could actually live that?
Right, right,
That 365 days of the year, nobody lives that.
right,
But
right.
that's the expectation and that's the comparison that we often make. But when we're grateful, I could be mindful of, gosh, I'm sitting here, on the show, and I feel reasonably well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any back pain. I was
Mm-hmm.
able to wake up at a decent time this morning.
Mm-hmm.
Woke up next to my loving wife. Those are
Mm-hmm.
things that I can be grateful for, that
Mm-hmm.
are not necessarily tied to me making comparisons to other people or any sense of materialism.
Yeah, I mean, because really it's about being comfortable in your own skin and realizing that the life you have to lead uh, may be different from other people, and the outcomes, the victories and the challenges may be different as well. But too oftentimes we isolate ourselves in our emotion, and we are so quick quick to look to see at people who are similarly situated in terms of our age, our education, or whatever, and think that somehow life has dealt us a bad hand when we don't have the aces that someone else does. When someone comes in your office, and obviously it's a very tangible and practical thing to do, is to begin to write out some things that help people, encourage them to do that. But how can we direct people in our circle of friends and family who just can't see it? Because it's just not children or adolescents who fail to be grateful. But they're adults, and as I alluded to earlier, some adults well advanced in their years who just simply don't know that they're blessed. And so how can we steer people to help them to see that though they have some challenges, there are some bright spots and rays of hope?
One of the things that I find myself doing in the office, but also in my personal life, is that when the conversations are drifting to the negative, I try to just turn them around to the positive. I try to comment on what I see are some of the blessings that person may have, or we may talk about the blessings that we're both experiencing even in that moment. Try to steer the conversation away from the negativity. Most people may not be receptive to hearing that, hey, 90% of the time that we talk is about negative stuff or about other people. Most people probably don't want to hear that feedback, but we can take a part in trying to steer that conversation. That's one. But the second thing is this. If we find people who are continually negative, right? And these may sometimes be people that we love. Sometimes we have to put insulation between ourselves and those people, because what we tend to be around, we tend to over time absorb, right? We become the average of the 6 people that we hang out with. If those other 6 people are negative, give it enough time, you will start to absorb that too.
Right.
Sometimes we have to put a safe distance between us and people who tend to be negative, and then be very intentional in seeking out people who are more positive, right? I want to be around people who are 5 times more positive than I am, so maybe I can be a little bit more positive.
Right.
So those are sometimes the relationships that we may have to seek.
I mean, the challenge is to encourage people, again, as we're just on the evening of our last, heels in our last topic series, taking care of yourself. Sometimes we can make people feel bad for making decisions that help them preserve their peace, their joy, their optimism, their hope, their positivity toward life. And I think what you're saying is that we have to make some critical decisions at times to maintain our peace. I often say that each day that we step, our feet hit the floor, a story is being written in our life, and a chapter is being developed. And I think sometimes we look for other people to be the hero of our own story, and we need to set out to be the hero of our own story. And by being the hero of our own story may actually mean that we get rid of some villains who come in the way, who may share our last name, who may have their same blood going through our veins. And so I think I think what's missing today is honesty. And I think that we're in a PC world, and we're often pushed into what to say and not to say. But we all, the old adage is, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And there's a right way to say it and a wrong way to say it. And I think, would you agree, Dr. Moss, that people need to be emboldened to be very intentional and purposeful about who they spend their downtime with?
So true. If we have goals of wanting to be our better selves, and part of that is, I want to be better with my mood. I want to make better decisions. I want to be lighter. I want that peace and joy that you talked about. Some of it is, controlling our thoughts, right? Being very intentional
Mhm.
about what we're thinking about, gratitude, writing it out, being a part of that. But when we think about trying to keep ourselves safe, sometimes we have to monitor that the cliche that we find, when in recovery. It's not really a cliche; it's the truth. It's the truth. People, places, and things. Exclude those things which are harmful, unfortunately, out of our lives, and sometimes that means keeping a safe distance, even from some of the people that we care about.
Well, moving forward, if we want to create an atmosphere of gratitude, and we want gratitude and attitude to permeate all of our lives, and we as parents, those who are grandparents, aunts, and uncles, what are maybe some practical things we can do as children to help them develop this heart of gratitude, to look at things and understand that they have some things, despite of whatever they've gone through,
Mhm.
to be grateful. What are some practical things we can help? What parents can do to help children, or grandparents can help grandchildren take on an attitude of gratitude?
I think one is, being that model of gratitude. And
Hmm.
in being that model, we have to be vocal about what is going good.
Hmm.
And I know that there may be some degree of lack or a challenge that's in that particular, home environment, but being very vocal about what is good in that current moment. And hopefully the things that we're going to be vocal about that are good are non-material things, right? So we're not going to talk about the car, we're not going to talk about the house, we're not going to talk about the clothes, but we're going to talk about the good time that we're having. We're going to talk about the good joke that somebody told,
Hmm.
about how great the weather is or how good our bodies feel. We're going to talk about those things and try as much as we can to minimize the negative talk about circumstances and about people.
And I think we've got to grow to be able to understand that the self talk that we may engage in may be a conversation with ourselves that we need to draw quickly to an end, and to make sure that we don't do that. And I think before our children, you're absolutely right. In a very practical sense, as we look even toward Thanksgiving, a time in which the emphasis is placed on being grateful, being thankful. In principle, started years ago by President Roosevelt. In principle, it was a great idea that we as Americans, we in the land of the free, the home of the brave, we who are in this capitalistic society should take time out to say thank you. But even before President Roosevelt, the psalmist said, "Oh, give thanks unto the Lord,
Right.
for He is good; His truth and His mercy um, endure forever." What do we need to do? What can we do? What should we do as a people? What should we do in our homes? What things should we do to make sure that we, if nothing else, you talked about exemplifying gratitude. How can we be examples of that?
So, one part of gratitude is it's being grateful, thankful, right?
Hmm.
And having that disposition and experiencing that, not necessarily feeling it, but
Hmm.
experiencing that. The other side of that is actually doing something with it.
Hmm.
So that means doing an act that goes along with that gratitude.
Hmm.
So I'm experiencing gratitude and I'm grateful for this. And in light of that, I'm going to do this good act. And so that kind of seals the deal with this loop of gratitude. We
Hmm.
get this one bump in our mood because we're experiencing gratitude and we're vocalizing it or we're writing it down. That's the first half. But the second half is when we're actually able to take that and then we're able to deposit into somebody else.
All right.
When we study that, we tend to think that the person who's getting the gift or the
Hmm.
deposit or the act of kindness, we tend to think that that person is getting the greater reward. But when we study this, it's actually people who are giving
Wow.
midst of the gratitude, they actually get the greater neuropsychological reward.
Wow.
This is the person who's actually getting the gift. So
Wow.
thinking gratitude, writing gratitude, vocalizing it, and then matching it up with an act of kindness to somebody else.
Wow.
Here's the deal.
Well, I thank you tonight as we begin this in the next couple of weeks. We will definitely replay this as a classic on next week. But following that, we will continue this discussion for a couple sessions. And we'll be able to see how some people have gone from tragedy to triumph from being thankful. And so I'm excited, and to our viewers, I hope you will stay tuned over the next couple of weeks because you will be in touch with those who have some very great testimonies that in spite of everything they've gone through, they still maintain a posture of gratitude. And all the things they've gone through, we'll be blessed to hear some folks say, I'm still grateful. Thanks again, Dr. Moss, for joining us tonight on, again, what I believe is a very important journey to promote mental health, mental wellness, not just within our own community, but the community abroad. And I really do believe that people are what they think, and they are what they feel. And to that end, to our viewers who are watching tonight, and those of you who will watch later, as always, we just want to really, really encourage you, really want you to encourage you to feel better, become better, and live better.